In 1978, the world witnessed one of the most disturbing and tragic events in modern history, the Jonestown Massacre. Nearly 1,000 people lost their lives under the influence of a manipulative cult leader, Jim Jones. But what really happened in those final hours? Why did so many follow his fatal command, and what do the stories of the survivors reveal about that dark day? It began when Congressman Leo Ryan traveled to Jonestown in Guyana. He had received alarming reports from concerned families and defectors who claimed that the People's Temple, a religious and social movement led by Jones, had turned into something far more sinister than the utopian community its leader promised. Ryan brought along journalists and worried relatives, determined to see the truth with his own eyes. At first, things looked almost ideal. The group was shown smiling residents, lush crops, and children playing, a picture of harmony. Ryan himself even remarked that for many of the residents, this seemed like the best thing that had ever happened in their lives. But behind the scenes, something very different was unfolding. During the visit, one of the journalists quietly received a note from a desperate resident. The words were simple yet chilling. "Please help us get out of Jonestown." Soon after, more people approached Ryan's team in secret, begging for a chance to leave with them. By the next morning, it was clear. Dozens of residents wanted to escape. When Congressman Ryan confronted Jim Jones and demanded that those who wished to leave be allowed safe passage, the mood in the compound shifted dramatically. Tension rippled through the crowd. Former aide Jackie Spire, who accompanied Ryan, later recalled that the atmosphere was like a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. Families argued over what to do. Parents clashed about whether to stay or go, some even fighting over custody of their children right there in the compound. Jones, realizing he was losing control, became visibly agitated. Then, just as Ryan prepared to leave with the defectors, a man lunged at him with a knife. Ryan survived the attack, but it was a warning sign of the violence to come. The group of defectors, along with Ryan and his team, piled into trucks and made their way to the nearby airstrip, where planes waited to fly them out. But Jim Jones had no intention of letting them escape so easily. Among the group was Larry Layton, one of Jones's most loyal followers, sent under the guise of being a defector. Meanwhile, other armed temple members followed the trucks in a tractor trailer. As the defectors boarded the planes, the sudden crack of gunfire erupted across the airstrip. Panic broke out. Jackie Spire remembered running for cover as Congressman Ryan was gunned down before her eyes. In the chaos, 5 people were killed. Ryan himself, 3 journalists, and one of the defectors. Many others, including Spire, were gravely wounded. The attackers then fled into the jungle, leaving the survivors bleeding on the tarmac. Back in Jonestown, Jones made his final move. Using the loudspeakers that he so often used to deliver long, rambling sermons, he called the residents to gather at the central pavilion. The compound fell into an eerie silence as families, friends, and children walked toward the meeting place, watched closely by armed guards. Survivors later described the scene as unlike anything they had ever experienced. Jones took the stage, his voice heavy and urgent. He told his followers that Congressman Ryan was dead, that the United States would come for them, and that there was no escape. If they could not live in peace, he declared, they would die in peace. Not everyone agreed. A longtime member named Christine Miller spoke up, saying that as long as there was life, there was hope. But her plea was drowned out by Jones's insistence. The order was given. Vats of cyanide mixed with grape flavor aid were brought out. Parents were told to give the poison to their children first. Armed guards stood by to ensure that no one disobeyed. Some people drank willingly, convinced that Jones was right. Others resisted, crying and begging for another way. Children had the deadly drink forced into their mouths. Those who tried to run were shot or stabbed. In just a few hours, over 900 men, women, and children lay dead. Jim Jones did not drink the poison himself. Instead, he died from a gunshot wound to the head. Whether self-inflicted or carried out by someone else remains uncertain. While the massacre at Jonestown was unfolding, a handful of people managed to survive through chance, resistance, or sheer luck. Their stories provide the most haunting and human perspective on what really happened. One such survivor was Tim Carter. During the gathering at the pavilion, he was ordered by Jones to take a suitcase filled with cash to the Soviet embassy in Georgetown, the capital of Guyana. Jones, who had long admired the Soviet Union, believed he might negotiate asylum for himself, and perhaps a select few if things went wrong. Carter set out with the money, unaware of the horror that was about to erupt behind him. He recalled later that it never crossed his mind they were all going to die, until he returned and saw his wife and child poisoned on the ground. The weight of that discovery stayed with him forever. Another survivor, Hyacinth Thrash, avoided the pavilion altogether. Despite being a longtime loyal member of the People's Temple, who credited Jones with healing her cancer, she disobeyed his call that night. Instead, she hid under her bed. When she awoke hours later, Jonestown was silent. Everyone, including her sister, was gone. Meanwhile, others managed to flee into the dense jungle. Tracy Parks, just 12 years old, ran for her life after her mother was gunned down at the airstrip. Her father shouted for her and her sister to hide, and she later described running so fast it felt like she didn't even touch the ground. It took them 3 days to find help, but they survived. Similarly, Leslie Wagner Wilson and a small group escaped before the poisoning began, walking nearly 30 miles through dangerous terrain to safety. She recalled that the fear was so overwhelming they exchanged phone numbers, convinced they might die before reaching civilization. The horror wasn't confined to Jonestown itself. In Georgetown, at a separate house used by temple members, the tragedy continued. Sharon Amos, a devoted follower and Jones's secretary, carried out his final orders from afar. She killed her 3 children and then herself. Even Jones's own sons, who were in Georgetown for a basketball game, were stunned when they learned what had happened back at the compound. For those left behind at the Port Kaituma airstrip, survival was an excruciating ordeal. With Ryan and 4 others dead, the wounded, including Jackie Spire, were stranded for 22 hours before help finally arrived. Spire, shot 5 times, later said there was no earthly reason she should have survived except that it wasn't her time. The lightly wounded tended to those with more severe injuries throughout the long night, all the while fearing the gunman might return to finish the job. When rescue teams finally reached the site, the scale of the catastrophe became clear. More than 900 bodies lay scattered in Jonestown, many of them children. Photographs from the aftermath shocked the world. Row upon row of lifeless forms sprawled across the grass, silent testimony to the power of blind obedience and fear. For decades, people debated whether Jonestown was a mass suicide or mass murder. Survivors and researchers increasingly agree that while some followed Jones willingly, most had little or no choice. Armed guards surrounded the pavilion. Children had no say. Many adults resisted and were forced. As survivor Tim Carter later said, "This wasn't a group choosing to die for Jim Jones. It was murder, plain and simple." Even in death, Jones remained controversial. Some saw him as a charismatic manipulator who preyed on the vulnerable, using faith and fear to build his power. Others, especially those who had joined the temple in its early years, remembered how the movement once focused on social justice, civil rights, and racial equality before spiraling into madness. That contradiction makes Jonestown one of the most chilling examples of how idealism can be twisted into tyranny. The legacy of Jonestown lives on not only in history books, but in culture and language. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" comes directly from this event, though the brand used was actually Flavor Aid. Today, the phrase is often thrown around casually, but its origins lie in unimaginable tragedy: the coerced deaths of hundreds of people, many of them children. For the survivors, life after Jonestown has been a long journey of grief, guilt, and healing. Jackie Spire went on to become a U.S. Congresswoman, carrying the scars of that day both physically and emotionally. Others, like Tim Carter and Leslie Wagner Wilson, have dedicated their lives to sharing their experiences, so the world never forgets what blind devotion to a dangerous leader can cause. Jonestown serves as a dark reminder of the power of manipulation, the dangers of isolation, and the vulnerability of those searching for hope in the wrong places. It was not simply a story of mass suicide. It was a story of control, coercion, and the ultimate betrayal by a man his followers trusted completely. In the end, Jim Jones did not lead his people to paradise, as he had promised. He led them to tragedy, and the echoes of Jonestown still warn us today. Beware the leader who demands absolute loyalty, silences dissent, and cloaks their power in promises of salvation.